And I know that a lot of people are hurting. Let me acknowledge that. I know that. But to go out there and retaliate doesn't make anything
A man lifts a gun inside a gas station. No shots fired. No words exchanged. Just a message delivered in seconds. At first glance, it looks minor. A flash of steel. A claim of dominance. A choice meant to end quickly. That single act sets off a chain reaction that leaves 3 people dead. Those deaths lead to a funeral. A place meant for prayer, for grief, for final goodbyes. Instead, gunfire erupts again. 6 more people are hit. Mourners run. Families scatter. A sanctuary turns into another scene of chaos. Headlines flood the screen. Names stack up. Numbers rise. At this point, most people ask the same question. How does something like this keep happening? So here's a better one. Where does it actually start? And at what moment do you think this path could have been stopped? Because the case of John Hornezes Jr. is not a single act of violence. It's a pattern, a closed loop where retaliation replaces resolution, where young men inherit conflicts they didn't create, where entire neighborhoods absorb the fallout. This story unfolds over just 13 days. 13 days that reveal how fast one decision can multiply. I welcome you to the True Crime Cave, where we cover cases where violence doesn't just affect those involved. It destroys innocent lives caught in the crossfire. The kind of tragedy that strikes at bus stops, erupts at funerals, and tears entire communities apart. The moments that shatter real families and make us ask, could this happen in my neighborhood? You're here because you want to understand, not just observe. And together, we're building a community that thinks critically, demands change, and refuses to let these stories be forgotten. If the story impacts you, hit that like button. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether gang violence has affected your community. And subscribe, because you're not just a viewer here. You're part of the conversation that could help break the cycle. Now, let's uncover the deep details of this story. To understand what happened on October 15th, you need to understand the north side of Pittsburgh, specifically Cedar Avenue. This stretch of the city is more than streets and buildings. It's an area claimed by active conflict. In the eyes of the young men who roam that street, every corner, every block is claimed, guarded, and defended. Gang presence here wasn't a rumor. It was constant. Eyes watched from every corner. Cars cruised slowly, scanning. Conversations carried weight, and silence often spoke louder than words. For those living here, a careless step, a sideways glance, or the wrong word could be the start of trouble. For young men caught up in this life, respect isn't optional. It's survival. Disrespect is dangerous. Weakness can be fatal. And on that October night, every decision mattered. At 10:03 p.m., Jacquelyn Mehalic, 21, walks into the Sunoco gas station on Cedar Avenue. Inside, he spots Sharon Troutman, 19. They are neither friends nor allies. Both are aware of the rules of this world. Any perceived slight must be addressed. Troutman, sitting in a black Hyundai Tucson outside, sees Hines enter. He makes a choice. A firearm is raised. A message is sent. This isn't about shooting first. It's about showing strength, marking territory, making sure no one forgets who belongs here. For Troutman, it's a calculated move. Smart, necessary, defensive. At least, that's how he sees it. What he doesn't see is the spark he just struck. A decision that seemed small in the moment has set a chain of events into motion that no one could have predicted. Hines could have left the gas station, could have gone home, could have let the moment pass. But in this world, walking away is a risk in itself. Walking away is weakness. Weakness is visible, and visibility can be deadly. So he doesn't walk away. Instead, Hines crosses Cedar Avenue and heads to Allegheny Commons Park. He's not alone. John Hornezes Jr., 20, is with him. Another individual, still unknown, completes the gang trio. Each is armed. Each knows what's at stake. They take positions in the park, across the street from the Sunoco gas station. They wait, watching, calculating, preparing. This is how cycles begin. Disrespect demands response. Response demands retaliation. And retaliation, all too often, demands blood. Before we move further, take a moment to hit like. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to True Crime Cave. Understanding moments like this isn't just about following a story. It's about recognizing the patterns that turn small choices into life-altering consequences. That night, on a street that had seen conflict before, a spark ignited, and by the time it burned through the neighborhood, 3 people would be dead, and many more lives would be changed forever. At 10:15 p.m., just 12 minutes after the confrontation inside the gas station, the black Hyundai Tucson rolls past Cedar Avenue. Inside are Sharon Troutman and the driver, Samuel Pagay. From their perspective, the message had already been delivered. The moment had passed. It was time to leave the area. They didn't know they were being watched. Across the street, in Allegheny Commons Park, Jacquelyn Hines, John Hornezes Jr., and a third armed individual were waiting. Tension hung in the air, tight and unforgiving. No words were exchanged. No warning was given. Gunfire broke out almost instantly. More than 20 rounds were fired in seconds. Shots came from both sides. Bullets cut across Cedar Avenue, tearing through the night. Glass exploded. Parked cars absorbed impact. The street became a danger zone for anyone nearby. And nearby, completely unaware of any of this, were 2 women waiting for a bus. Betty Averytt was 59 years old. A grandmother of 11, she stood at the bus stop, phone in hand, texting family members, thinking about home, about tomorrow, about the people she loved. Next to her stood Jacquelyn Mehalic, 33 years old, a mother of 4. She had finished another long day and was waiting for a ride home. No connection to gangs. No involvement in disputes. Just another night, like so many before it. They never saw it coming. Bullets don't check identities. They don't recognize innocence. They don't stop once they leave the barrel. Betty Averytt was struck and died at the scene. Jacquelyn Mehalic was rushed to the hospital, where she later passed away from her injuries. In a matter of moments, 2 families were torn apart. 15 children lost a mother or a grandmother. Their lives changed forever by a conflict that had nothing to do with them. This is where the cost becomes undeniable. If you're watching this and feeling the weight of it, pause for a second and let me know in the comments. How many innocent lives have to be lost before cycles like this are taken seriously? But the bloodshed didn't stop with the bus stop. During that same exchange of gunfire, John Hornezes Jr. was hit. The 20-year-old collapsed near the park. Help arrived quickly. Allegheny General Hospital was only a block away. Still, doctors couldn't save him. At first, investigators believed he had been shot by consideration from across the street. It seemed logical. A gunfight, 2 sides firing. A tragic but expected outcome. That assumption didn't hold. Ballistic analysis showed the bullet enter from behind, traveling back to front. That detail changed everything. It meant the fatal shot did not come from the SUV. It came from the same side John was standing on. In the confusion, in the chaos, in a moment no one could control, there's a real possibility John Hornezes Jr. was killed by someone fighting alongside him. Violence doesn't follow plans. Loyalty offers no protection. And once shots are fired, no one is truly in control. 3 people were dead, and the cycle was only beginning. 3 lives were gone, and in their place, 3 families were left to pick up what could never be put back together. LaRonda Averytt stood in a morgue and identified her mother's body. No parent expects that task to fall to their child. No daughter prepares for that moment. Yet there she was, saying goodbye to Betty Averytt in the most final way possible. Across the city, Bridget Mehalic faced a future she never asked for. Her daughter Jacquelyn was gone. For children were suddenly without their mother. And Bridget became a full-time caregiver overnight, carrying grief alongside responsibility. For John Hornezes Jr., the loss cut just as deep. His godmother, Paige Davis, began planning a funeral for a young man she had helped raise. 20 years old, a life measured in potential, not years. As shock graduated into becoming reality, families turned to the only help available. GoFundMe pages appeared. Betty's family raised just over $3,000 to cover funeral expenses. Jacquelyn's family raised more, enough not only for burial costs, but for something far more heartbreaking: cremation as keepsakes. Small pieces of jewelry were made for Jacquelyn's 4 children, something tangible, something they could hold on to, a way to keep their mother close when nothing else remained. This is the real cost of street violence. Not headlines, not press conferences, but children wearing their mother's ashes because that's all they have left. If this moment hits you, pause here and take a moment to share this video because these stories matter, and silence only lets the pattern continue. As families mourned, investigators moved quickly. Surveillance footage from 17 cameras was reviewed. Shot detection data mapped the gunfire. Shell casings were collected. Witness accounts were compared. Piece by piece, the events of that night came into focus. On November 2nd, arrests were made. Jacquelyn Hines, Sharon Troutman, Samuel Piguet. Mugshots filled the news. Charges were announced. For a brief moment, it felt like accountability had arrived, like the violence had reached its endpoint. But justice moved slower than bullets. And while the legal process began, something else remained unfinished. The cycle had not released its grip on the city. It was still moving. October 28th, 2022. 13 days after John Hornezes Jr. was killed, family and friends gathered at Destiny of Faith Church on Brighton Road. Cars lined the street. A hearse arrived. People stepped inside carrying grief, hoping this would be the moment where pain could finally be set down, even if only briefly. John's godmother, Paige Davis, was there. She had already endured more loss than anyone should in such a short span of time. This service wasn't about anger. It wasn't about retaliation. It was about honoring a life and finding some sense of closure. But the tension never fully left. The family knew there were threats. They knew emotions were raw. They understood how these patterns work. So they did something rare. They asked for protection. Police approved the request and assigned 2 officers to the funeral. There was just one problem. Those officers went to the wrong location. They checked a nearby funeral home, found nothing happening, and left. Meanwhile, at Destiny of Faith Church, the service continued without protection. At 12:04 p.m., a little more than an hour into the ceremony, Pastor Brenda Gregg was speaking from the pulpit. The service was being streamed live, so people who couldn't attend could still say goodbye. Inside the church, tears flowed. Heads were bowed. The room was heavy with loss. Gunfire cut through the moment. The live stream audio captured it first. A burst of shots. A pause. Then a longer barrage. Shot detection systems recorded it immediately. 20 rounds fired outside the church, tearing through a space that was supposed to be for mourning the death of John Hornezes Jr. Inside, panic erupted. People dropped to the floor. Screams filled the room. Parents shielded children. Grief turned into fear in seconds. Outside, 6 people were struck by gunfire. 6 more victims. 6 more families pulled into trauma. All while a funeral was underway inside the building. Let that sit for a moment. A church, a funeral, a place meant for reflection and peace, transformed into a target. If you're still watching, pause here to subscribe to the channel. Stories like this aren't just about crime. They're about patterns that keep repeating when nothing interrupts them. Within hours, police detained 2 suspects. Sean Davis, 19 years old. Hezekiah Nixon, 16. Imagine that, 16 years old. Surveillance footage showed them approaching the church from Betty Avenue, faces covered, weapons in hand. They had been nearby earlier, watching, waiting, timing the moment. When officers attempted to stop their vehicle, Nixon tossed his gun from McKees Rocks Bridge into the Ohio River. Divers later recovered it. That weapon carried its own history. It had already been used in another killing months earlier. 1 man dead, 3 others wounded. At 16 years old, Hezekiah Nixon wasn't new to violence. He was already deeply embedded in it. This is how the cycle sustains itself. Younger faces, heavier consequences, no space left untouched, not even a funeral. So let's slow this down and look at what's actually happening here. Because this story isn't only about John Hornezes Jr., it's about a structure of violence that pulls young men in and tears entire neighborhoods apart. Street violence operates on a strict code. Disrespect demands a response. Territory must be defended. Loyalty is enforced through action. And retaliation isn't optional. It's expected. When someone from your circle is hurt or killed, silence is seen as surrender. And surrender, in this world, can cost you your life. That pressure explains why many young men are into this lifestyle in the first place. In communities starved of opportunity, gangs offer what feels like protection, belonging, identity, and income. When legitimate paths seem blocked, when no one appears to care, that promise can feel convincing. But it's a lie. Gangs don't protect you. They expose you. They don't give respect. They put a target on your back. They don't replace family. They leave real families grieving. And once you're in, leaving safely becomes almost impossible. The damage doesn't stop with those who choose this path. Betty Averytt wasn't involved. Jacquelyn Mehalic wasn't involved. Most of the people shot outside that church weren't involved. Still, they paid the price. Because violence like this doesn't stay contained. It spreads to bus stops, to churches, to places where children and grandparents should feel safe. Think about what that does to a neighborhood. Parents keep their kids indoors. Seniors hesitate to leave home. Businesses shut down. Families move away. The area slowly empties of hope. If this analysis resonates, pause here and share your thoughts in the comments. What actions do you think actually breaks a cycle like this? After the funeral shooting, Pittsburgh Mayor Ed Gainey stood before cameras, visibly shaken. He called the church holy ground, struggling to understand how even a funeral could become a target. He urged the community not to strike back, to work with police, to choose a different path. But beneath his words was a hard truth. Everyone already knew what usually comes next. Because cycles like this don't end on their own. They end when someone stops them. So what happened to the people responsible? Did the system respond? Here's where accountability finally entered the story. Let's start with Cedar Avenue. Jacquelyn Hines pleaded guilty in June 2025. He was sentenced for his role in the deaths of Betty Averytt and Jacquelyn Mehalic, 2 women who were never part of any dispute. The court focused on his decisions that night, crossing the street armed, opening fire on a crowded block, and choosing confrontation over restraint. Those choices carried permanent consequences, not just for him, but for 2 families who will never be whole again. Sharon Troutman and Samuel Pagay, the men inside the SUV, also face serious charges. Forensic findings showed that John Hornezes Jr. was not killed by gunfire from across the street, leading to homicide charges tied to his death being dismissed. But that didn't erase their responsibility. Both men returned fire on a busy avenue, knowing civilians were nearby. They faced attempted homicide, aggravated assault, and weapons charges for their role in turning a public street into a danger zone. Now, the funeral shooting. Hezekiah Nixon was 16 years old when he fired outside Destiny of Faith Church. In September 2025, he pleaded guilty and received a sentence of 11 to 22 years in prison. If he serves the minimum, he will be nearly 40 before he has any chance at release. His teenage years, his 20s, his 30s, all spent behind bars because he chose to carry violence into a place meant for mourning. Sean Davis, 19 at the time of the shooting, remains in legal limbo based on recent reports. Trials still ahead, but regardless of outcome, the the trajectory of his life has already changed. Even without a life sentence, decades in prison are a real possibility. This is what justice looks like in cases like this. Long sentences, courtrooms filled with grief, accountability written in years behind bars. But here's the truth. Justice doesn't raise the dead. It doesn't restore mothers to children. It doesn't heal neighborhoods or erase fear. If you're still here, consider subscribing to True Crime Cave. These stories matter because prevention matters more than punishment. Accountability came just far too late. Stopping the cycle requires action long before a judge ever speaks. Let's count the cost of that single moment at the gas station. One decision to raise a gun. One choice framed as respect. 3 people dead. Betty, Jacquelyn, John. 6 people shot outside a funeral. Others injured, shaken, forced to carry trauma they never asked for. 3 families planning burials instead of futures. 15 children growing up without a mother or grandmother. A 16-year-old facing decades behind bars. Several young men sentenced to lose their best years to prison. 2 neighborhoods living in fear. A city left asking how this keeps happening. All of it traced back to one moment where reputation mattered more than life. That's the truth about gang violence. It isn't strength. It isn't power. It isn't loyalty. It's destruction, plain and irreversible. Every young person pulled into this world is a future erased. Someone who might have built something meaningful becomes a headline or an inmate, not because they lacked ability, but because the environment convinced them violence was the only language that mattered. Families absorbed the damage next. John's godmother, Paige Davis, helped raise him, loved him, guided him. She buried him. She also survived gunfire at his funeral. Betty's daughter lost her mother while she waited for a bus. Jacquelyn's children carry memories instead of bedtime routines. This pain is real, and it spreads far beyond those who held weapons. Communities suffer too. When violence controls a neighborhood, fear replaces trust. Parents keep children inside. Businesses shut their doors. Schools struggle. Hope drains away block by block. No one wins, not residents, not families, not even the people pulling the triggers. And the biggest lie of all is the promise. Protection that makes you a target. Respect that leads to a grave. Family that leaves your real family standing over a casket. If this message matters to you, take a second to share this video. These conversations can change outcomes when they reach the right person. Here's what matters most. This pattern is not permanent. It breaks when someone chooses differently. Walking away instead of responding. Refusing to join. Asking for help instead of reaching for a weapon. Choosing a future over approval. One choice at a time. That's how cycles end. Walking away isn't weakness. It's courage. It takes more strength to stop violence than to repeat it. If you're caught in this world or standing close to it, there are people who want to help. Mentors, community groups, churches, programs led by those who survived and got out. You are not alone, even if it feels that way. Your life is worth more than a street corner, more than a reputation, more than any label placed on you. You matter. Before anyone picks up a gun, think about Betty waiting for her bus. Think about Jacquelyn heading home to her children. Think about the families who will carry that loss forever. No argument is worth that price. October 15th, 2022 began like any other day in Pittsburgh. Betty Jean Averytt woke up thinking about her grandchildren. Jacquelyn Christine Mehalic went about her day, planning to get home to her children. John James Hornezes Jr. spent the evening doing what countless 20-year-olds do, living in the moment, not expecting it to be his last. None of them knew that before the night was over, their lives would be gone. The bus stop on Cedar Avenue would be empty. A hospital room would fall silent. A family would receive news that could never be undone. This did not have to happen. If one gun hadn't been raised, if one person had chosen to walk away, if pride had taken a back seat to restraint, if grief had been allowed to exist without turning into retaliation, there were countless points where a different decision could have changed everything. But those decisions weren't made. And that is where the real tragedy lives. Because this wasn't fate. It wasn't unavoidable. It wasn't written in stone. The violence continued because people chose to continue it. The cycle kept moving because no one stopped it when it was still time. And that means it can be stopped. If you're watching this and you're involved in gang life or thinking about it or standing close to someone who is, hear this clearly. It is not too late. Your future does not have to end at a gravesite or behind bars. One decision can redirect an entire life. That decision can happen today. Walking away is not weakness. Asking for help is not failure. Choosing life is strength. And if you're watching this thinking it doesn't affect you, consider this. When innocent people are killed while waiting for a bus, no one is untouched. When funerals turn into shooting scenes, the damage spreads far beyond one block or one neighborhood. When young men lose decades of their lives to prison, society loses potential that can never be replaced. This isn't just one city's problem. It belongs to all of us. If this story moved you, take a moment to share it. Conversations like this matter more than algorithms. They matter because someone watching might still have time to choose differently. The pattern we've talked about is real. The consequences are real. But so is the possibility of change. Choose life. Choose peace. Choose a future. Because the alternative is clear. More empty chairs at dinner tables. More parents burying children. More children growing up without guidance. More neighborhoods shaped by fear instead of hope. Betty Averytt. Jacquelyn Mehalic. John Hornezes Jr. 3 lives lost. 3 families forever changed. 1 senseless chain of violence. Let their story stand as a warning. Let it push conversations forward. Let it remind us that every choice matters. If you've stayed with me to the end, let me hear from you. Do you believe cycles like this can be broken? Have you seen the impact of this kind of violence where you live? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story mattered to you, hit the like button and pass it along. These stories only make a difference when they're heard. Here on True Crime Cave, we don't just recount events. We examine why they happen and what they teach us. If you want more deep, thoughtful stories like this, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. And if you or someone you know needs help stepping away from gang life, resources are listed in the description. Support exists. Help exists. Change is possible. Break the cycle.